Matt?
Thank you. Thank you, Edward. And I thank everybody for coming, and I thank INACS for having me here this evening. And I have got some interesting stuff to share with you guys. My insatiable curiosity kind of has led me down this path. At a pretty young age, my background kind of was having experiences. So my early experiences where it seemed as if time was speeding up. And my mother would like say, Matt, what's wrong? What's wrong? It's like, whoa, whoa, slow down, slow down. Everything seemed to be moving faster. And I didn't understand what was going on until a few years later, where I had one of these experiences. I was probably 4 or 5 years old. And I don't know if you guys probably remember the old Christmas tree lights that would flash at their own accord, not like these new LED lights. And I could see the lights flashing faster. And at that point, I recognized that something in time was changing. How could I see something moving quicker? And I started to think, well, there's something to do with time. And then I had other experiences where I perceived something that was kind of energetically like following us at one point as a kid, sitting in, you guys remember how we had that back seat in the station wagon where you could actually see out the back? And that was the seat I always got stuck in. So I was always, and I saw something, it was really strange. So, and I had another experience where I actually saw like these, I woke up one night, and I don't know if I was dreaming or not. I was sleeping over at a friend's house in the living room, and I heard the dogs kind of running around the backyard. So I looked out the window, and I could see all these little people running around. It was so bizarre. And I moved out of that house when I was about 4, so that was between, birth and 4 years old. So I had a lot of different experiences at a really young age, so it opened up my curiosity. I just wanted to kind of understand and look at things. And so by the time I was in, I think it was 5th or 6th grade, the teacher said, okay, it's your chance to pick a book. And the book I picked was A Reincarnation of Peter Proud. The teacher's eyes just about popped out. She was like, what are you reading here? So that was a really interesting book for me at a really young age, and that book eventually became a movie. I started to get involved with different organizations, going to groups and getting involved with stuff. I ended up coordinating a lecture series for 3 years where I had people talk about all kinds of metaphysics and the paranormal. I actually was involved with a group called OPUS, which is the Organization for Paranormal Understanding and Support. I became a director. I got involved with producing conventions. I produced some pretty interesting alternative conventions having to do with a lot of alternative thought and the paranormal and UFOs, and it just exposed me to a lot of very interesting and curious people. I was always seeking spiritual truth and trying to get to what information really I thought was significant, and it wasn't until I came across a near-death experience that I found something that I thought was very significant. Because here are people that are coming back from the other side, talking about this place in light and love, and in most cases they weren't necessarily trying to sell books or they weren't trying to sell religion. It was what was heartfelt, and to me it was powerful. It was some of the most significant information I'd ever come across. So as I researched and dug into this, I started to find other types of spiritual transformative experiences that were also very significant, but yet it was a thread that tied through, and I hadn't really come across any information that really connected all those dots together, and I just think it was really a really important thing. So I felt, okay, I'm going to put something together, and that's why I came up with the Soul Code, to get that information out, to say here's a thread and here's how we tie all these different things together. And I'm constantly on the path to find different areas that could substantiate this energy field around us as well. Like Heart Math Institute has found that we have these energy fields, that the head has like a 5-foot field and our heart has a 15-foot field, and there's things called biophotons. And they found that these biophotons are actually that we have, the scientists call it ultra-weak chemiluminescent signals that emanate from our body. And this biophotonic, you can look up biophotons on Wikipedia, and there's a whole light network within our bodies that are all connected to this biophotonic field, and it's a very new science. but now every major university have these things called photomultipliers that are proving that we have a biophotonic field. And I'm always looking for electrical potential and resonance, so I've always been searching to kind of substantiate that we are a soul, that we do have this energy field, and it is of significance. So as I researched the near-death experience, I started to come across more and more interesting information of how this information could be the potential that has helped as a catalyst for human evolution and even religion. Because this information that people are bringing back from the other side is very, it seems to be very integrated with a lot of deep philosophical ideas. I mean, Plato, some of his information kind of digs into how these near-death experiences occurred and have occurred throughout time. Abraham Lincoln was kicked in the head a couple times, and he is thought to have possibly had a near-death experience. Nikola Tesla had severe bouts with illness as a child, and he's a genius. I mean, did he have these experiences and tap into this higher dimensional aspect of who we are? Gandhi had been beaten and recognized separateness from his body. There's just a lot of other things. Einstein was said to have gotten ill and have nearly died, and Carl Jung also had a profound experience with that seemed to be, I mean, near-death experience hadn't been coined at that point, but that seems like something that he experienced as well. Sharon Stone had a near-death experience and became very into philanthropy and different things. So as I went through all this information, trying to make sense, I started to see that there was key words that people were using in describing these experiences. And a lot of these words seemed to be very close to, they had no other words, so it was very close to what religions have been using for hundreds or thousands of years. And these words are key words to understanding our spiritual self. But yet it's also connected to what I see as a dimensional side of our existence. And that's where I'm going to kind of lead here into the dimensionality of our existence and how we are connected to this higher dimensional source. And so what I've done with the spiritual language is that some of these words, like the soul matrix, because I'm seeing that we need to create a lexicon of words. And this lexicon of words are words like heaven, soul, spirit, eternity, love. These are all words that we're all familiar with, but they seem to have so much religious dogma connected to them that a lot of times when I start to talk about this stuff with people, they say, oh, well, you're going into religion. I don't really want to, I'm not, and I'm like, no. I'm talking about this from a dimensional aspect. So I think it's important that we start to kind of move these words into more of a spiritual language and less of a dogmatic religion terms. I mean, early philosophers and religions have been using these words, and now it's time to pull them into a different context that has to do with spirituality without all that religious connection to it. So the soul matrix is my term for what a lot of religious organizations call as heaven. Because what I found is that there is a place where we do reside at this higher dimensional level. And in some cases I like to call God the infinite source, because it seems to be the infinite source of all things that we are connected to. And that infinite source seems to be, from my research, non-religious research, that infinite source seems to be pure love energy. And I'll kind of get into that here a little bit more. Since most of you are probably familiar with near-death experience, I'm not going to go into it too deeply. I'm going to mention some of the more profound things that I've kind of uncovered or found, and I'm sure you guys are familiar with a lot of this stuff. But it seems to be, one of the things that I think is interesting from a near-death experience is that when people get into this other higher dimensional aspect of ourselves, they connect with deceased relatives and friends, and a lot of times they'll connect with friends out there, and then they come back from their near-death not knowing that friend had died, and then when they go to look into it, it's like, whoa, I saw that friend out there, and now I've come to find that they're not alive anymore. And another thing that I think is interesting is that during the life review, people talk about the life flashing before them, is not only every thought, pain, joy, not every emotion that they're having, they're remembering. They're also remembering the pain and joy and experiences of the people they interacted with during their lifetime. It's almost as if we're all reading each other's minds at a subconscious level. But it's not until we leave the physical body that we recognize all that information. Because a lot of people will talk about how they recognize how they affected somebody else and how that person affected the next, which affected the next. So they're seeing things from a higher dimensional matrix. And it helps them understand, hey, we are all connected and everything we do is significant because of this connection. And what else is interesting is that it seems as if we're truly not being judged. We're judging ourselves for our own actions. And we are looking at it from this higher dimensional aspect. It's not, even though these beings of light are watching, they are not judging. We are self-interpreting the situation. And so it's pretty interesting. And other things I've seen about near-death experience I thought was pretty mind-blowing was the spontaneous healing. Some of you people might be familiar with Anita Majori's case, where she was ridden with cancer. She leaves her body, goes up to a higher dimensional place, recognizes her thoughts and her thought patterns, and sees that, wow, I just need to look at things from a different kind of a place. And once she saw that, she came back into her body and spontaneously healed within a very short amount of time. If anybody's read her book, it's very, very, very interesting how that's happened. And Eben Alexander, who's also was like, he shouldn't have come back to life, and he did. And I don't know how many people might be familiar with Thomas Mellon Benedict, a little less known person. Thomas Mellon Benedict had a very interesting time during his near-death experience. He actually left his body, went out, and as he's going down the light tunnel, he's with this being of light, angel or whatever you want to call it, and as he's traveling down, he says, whoa, 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 wait a second, whoa, 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 I want to see what's going on here. Let's slow this whole thing down. And it's all of a sudden he kind of stops in the tunnel, and he recognizes that there's this consciousness, and he kind of says, well, can I see what's going on? And this being took him through like the universe and took him on this tour of according to him, to like the beginning of time. And the information he brought back is just mind-blowing. So if anybody wants, there's a couple of websites, just type in Thomas Mellon Benedict, you'll find his story. It is really, really interesting how he kind of said, hold it up here, whoa, whoa, and then he just goes out on this whole journey. And when he died in his home, because he had died of cancer. Now, another case of changing your perspective. He believed that humans were like we were, like bad, like a virus on the planet. We were eating it away. That was his belief about humanity. And he recognized that his cancer, or whatever his disease was that was killing him, was a direct connection to his beliefs. So when he got out on this higher dimensional plane and recognized that we are beautiful beings, that humanity is awesome, and we are here to enjoy this really powerful experience, when he came back into his body, he totally healed as well. But according to his information, he was dead for hours. And he told the person, his caretaker, not to touch his body for hours. He said, don't, let me stay there for a long period of time. And he came right back with no medical assistance and came back to life. So that's a really, really interesting story. Now, as I dug deeper in, I started to find other information that seemed to be this thread. Because first I was just researching all this information about near-death experience, which to me was very, very significant. But when I started to, my curiosity just is never quenched, and I'm just looking and looking. I come across this preconception memory information. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar, but there's a couple people in town here that have written a book called The Cosmic Cradle, and there's other people out there that are publishing this information. Some people seem to have this preconception memory, and it wasn't through hypnosis, it's not necessarily through a near-death experience, but the information they're pulling together is unbelievable. It's as if we choose where we were born. It's not by chance. And these agreements are made prior to our conception. And it's almost as if our parents had a subconscious agreement with us on this higher dimensional plane to bring us into this world. And, you know, if I would have heard that years ago, I would have said, there's no way. But the more information that the Carmens have brought forth, and the more information some of these other people have brought forth, really starts to point to this direction. And it seems like, you know, and we've all, as human beings, I mean, obviously we were souls before our conception, and that we have made this conception agreement. And sometimes these conception agreements have specific things connected to them about, you know, how we're going to be in this physical plane, how things are going to, how our parents or we are going to be interacting in this relationship. And there is, you know, there's Aboriginal tribes that actually have this as written as part of their religion, that yes, there is this connection. And what else is interesting, we've all heard about Cupid, angels, and all this stuff. From the research, as bizarre as it sounds, these beings that, in some cases, we were children or we have children, these actually encouraged the parents to connect so they could be here. And there are these situations where they can see these situations and say, okay, this is my opportunity, come on, get together. So this whole Cupid concept is actually really, there's information that kind of supports this from this research. And there, in some of these cases, there was one case that the Carmens brought up where this kid remembers being, well, it was he's with a being of light, and the being of light says, well, you can be born into this very wealthy family, and you're going to have a very easy life in this. And the kid says, and these people are like in bed, and then the being of light shows him another couple, and it says, you can be in this family, it's a middle-class family, you're going to have a little rougher life, but you'll learn more as a spiritual being. And he says, oh, okay, I'll learn more with this one, a little tougher life. And then the being of light shows him a third family, and the third family is actually doing it in the front seat, and there's a baby asleep in the back seat, and he says, this is a poor family, and you can be born here, and you're going to have, you know, a harder life, but you're going to learn the most as a spiritual being in this life. And he says, that's it, that's where I want to be, So then he starts to grow up, and he has this memory his whole life, and he has like an older sister, so he said, okay, that's the baby in the back seat, or whatever the case. And it ends up, he tries to bring this up with his mom, and he's just a little kid, and his mom's like, what? No, just go play with your friends. Just totally ignores him. So then he feels kind of embarrassed. He waits until, I guess he's moved out of the house or he's older, and he says, Mom and Dad, I've had this memory my whole life, and I want to know if this is real. And so he gets his mom and dad down, sits them down, and tells the whole story. And his mom looks at his dad and says, I can't believe you told him. And he's like, oh, whoa. So it kind of confirmed the story. So there's a lot of very interesting stories about how people have these memories pre-conception. And sometimes the mothers will get messages through dreams. It seems like the mothers more than the fathers, because they're the ones that are carrying the baby, but there can be messages through dreams and through visions. And there's cases where they actually see a being of light that, you know, that comes into the room, and so there's a lot of other things that are cases. There was one case where a friend of a lady who was pregnant had a dream, and something, maybe like a little girl or a boy was telling her, no, I need more of something, I need more, and I think it was folate. They needed more greens or something. There was more, and so the lady says, hey, I had this dream that this baby, and it had to do with you, and I know it did, and it was you needed to get some more something. And she goes to the doctor, and the doctor basically says, yeah, you know, and goes to the doctor later just for a regular checkup, and the doctor says, oh yeah, you need more folate or something. And it was just funny because this lady was telling her that she needed something. But okay, so some of the people that have written about this stuff were the Carmens, who I mentioned, Sarah Hines, Elizabeth Hallett. They were researching pregnancy and different things, and they came across a lot of different information. Now, all the information in the Soul Code, my goal was just to do personal experiences, not to do psychics, mediums, channels, any of that stuff. But there was one guy that I came across through an interesting set of circumstances where his name was Walter McKitchen, and Walter was a psychic, and the information that he brought forth was so profound that I had to include it in the book. Walter ended up having some interesting things happen to him and was going to school and ready to graduate and with some master's or something, and this profound vision happened, and he decided to become a professional psychic. And it was like nothing he'd ever thought of. He'd had some interesting stuff happen where all the girls in high school would always ask him, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? You know, and he'd always have really good information for them. Well, it ends up his niche in the psychic field became helping women get pregnant. Don't take that wrong. So what he was able to do was to connect with these beings that were trying to be born, and in some cases would literally help the women by saying, you know, well, you need to do this or you need to change that. And he would give them like songs to chant or information, or have them talk to the soul, like, I'm ready for you, I want you to come here. And this is, a lot of women would come to him after they'd done all these medical procedures and nothing would work. And I mean, there's cases where one woman, they said, we couldn't get pregnant. Well, the woman was ambitious, she had a career, and at a deeper level, she knew that her career would be affected by getting pregnant, but she was telling her husband, no, I want, I really want to have a baby, I'll have a baby, but at a deeper level, she was concerned. Once McKitchen confronted her and had her bring this up to the surface and say, hey, this is what's really going on. The babies don't want to come through you because you have this resistance that it's going to affect your career, and nobody wants to come in to you with that animosity sitting over their head. So once he said, here, do this affirmation, just say everything, boom, got pregnant. And I mean, there was case after case where he would help these women, but he would connect with these souls. And I might be mixing up because I read a lot of different books, but I think there was a case where, I don't know how, something happened where somebody went to him, but it was an interesting case where this guy had lost his little brother. He jumped off of a cliff, they were swimming, and his little brother died, and then his little brother had come back as his son. And somehow McKitchen had identified this and said, and pointed stuff out. So I thought that was interesting how souls seem to come back into situations even though we just never know. So where I'm going with some of McKitchen's work is that he would encourage like an empathetic kind of connection with the mom, and he would teach them how to sing certain songs. The question is he beginning to create a spiritual language by what he was doing? Because he was using words that would encourage his mothers to communicate to this other dimensional aspect. And so is this part of the lexicon that I think is so important? Are there key words that can help us connect to this other dimensional side that we're a part of? So that is, I think that is very, very important, to be able to connect to the other side without having, the religious belief that we're doing some weird stuff, or not doing it through mediumship or channeling or necessarily through like drugs or DMT. If we can connect to that source ourselves, I think it's really, really important. So I found a couple of very interesting therapies. Now, I've made this word up, transdimensional therapy. It's just some word I came up with because I was trying to get a word that I felt encapsulated these new therapies that are going on. Now, these therapies are utilizing different aspects of hypnosis and other things. One of the therapies is called life between life regression. Now, I don't know if many of you are familiar with this. And what they're doing is they're certain therapists, and a couple of different therapists kind of were the leaders in starting this. But I believe it seems to tap into our subconscious mind, and it gets us into our deeper state. And I believe that it helps us understand reality from a higher dimensional aspect of who we really are. And it's amazing because it resolves interpersonal issues. It resolves issues that so many different types of therapy, and they give it all these different drugs that don't seem to do anything. But when these people get into these hyperdimensional, higher dimensional states, they seem to resolve interpersonal issues very, very quickly. And it's, and the patients always lose a fear of death because they recognize that they're connected to this other side. These systems are really powerful at healing the mind and spiritually related issues. And I really think that they should be they're looked at universities, and they're not. They're being done by these little independent people here and there. And the people that started this was a guy named Joe Fisher wrote a book, and I think it was Joel Winton and Joe Fisher wrote a book. And Dr. Winton was able to get people into this deeper hypnotic state. Now, you guys have probably heard of, past life regression, right? But this is in between life. Instead of going to the other life, it goes right in between. What are they remembering between that last life and this life? And so what they called this place in between was a metaconscious state. And when they got people into the metaconscious state, they were literally in heaven, bringing information back. And in this first book that I can't remember the name of the book, but it was very, very interesting. The second guy to come up with it his name was Dr. Michael Newton. And Newton Newton did 20 years of regression work, and Newton stumbled upon it with a case where, and I might be mixing up some of my stories, but basically it was something like he asked a lady to go back to the source. She's like, I'm so lonely. Well, let me do some hypnosis on you. And then he said to her, well, go back to the source of your loneliness. And she's like, I'm in a different place. And he's like, well, what do you mean you're in a different place? Because Newton didn't believe in a lot of this past life stuff or any of this stuff. And he's like, well, what do you mean? And she said, well, I'm with my friends that I've known for eons. And he's like, well, where are you? And she's like, I'm not sure. It seems like I'm in between. I'm in heaven. I'm in another place. So from Newton's research, he seemed to pull a lot of great information forward that have to do with this other dimensional place, which I call the soul matrix and religions call heaven. And this place is a place that we seem to reside between lifetimes. And that's the place these souls are that before conception was where we're hanging out. And there's a lot of stuff, way too much to go into, but reading Newton's books cover that stuff. But what I found from a lot of people a lot of the information that I came across is that people seem to report when they're just about ready to come into life, it's like, I want to remember this place of light and love I come from. Most important, I want to remember. And then as they're jumping in, they're saying, whoa, even more important, I want to remember to spread light and love while I'm here. And that seems to be a constant across the board that we all think right when we dive in. We just got to remember that. So, let me see where I am here. Getting a little sidetracked here. So so the life between life, I see that as a transdimensional therapy. Another one is induced after-death communication. Now, this is a guy named Alan Botkin, and Botkin actually, he actually was using a therapy called rapid eye desensitization, which uses, like our eyes as we get to a certain point. And what happened is that he inadvertently changed his protocol. And in changing his protocol, something happened. So his first patient, if I'm remembering this correctly, his first patient was he was doing a lot of PS, post-traumatic stress syndrome stuff with his techniques, with his stuff, and with the traditional rapid eye desensitization reprocessing. Then this one patient says, I'm in a situation and I see this woman's face. I guess he was having nightmares of somebody that accidentally got killed. He was a Vietnam vet, and they'd gone in to do something, and a woman died by accident somehow, and he saw this, he was having nightmares of her face and the pain that she was in. So then he's in this state with Botkin, and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, she's right there in front of me. And he's like, what do you mean she's in front of you? Well, she's right there, and she's telling me that she's in a better place, and she's happy, and it's not my fault. It's just things that happen, and it's all okay. And she was just giving him love, and he's like, and Botkin's like, well, what do you mean she's right there? What's going on here? And he's like, no. And he comes out of this state, brings him back, and he's like, wow, doc, I don't know what just happened, but but I feel great. And the doctor's like, whoa, I don't know what just happened, but yeah, that's awfully interesting. So the guy comes in for his normal weekly treatment the next week, and he's like, I'm good. No more nightmares. I'm healed. I don't need to come back anymore. And he's like, whoa, what just happened here? So Bodkin purposely tweaked his protocols and went into this and started doing this. It's kind of like rapid eye desensitization, where you're looking at this thing, but he changed the protocols and he started bringing people into these states. And it just, and he created this, what he calls IADC, which is Induced After Death Communication. And it has a tremendous effect healing patients of loss and post-traumatic stress syndrome. One of the cases, I'm always looking for evidence to kind of substantiate what people are experiencing out there. It's like I need to have somehow, my brain just wants evidence, wants information. One of the cases that was very interesting to me was a case where it was two girlfriends that had known each other many, many years, and one of the girlfriends invites her brother, who they'd known as well, to a party, and she kind of talked him into it, probably was a little flirty. He said, oh, come to the party, blah, blah, blah. And he had to drive an hour or more to get there. He ended up never showing up that night to the party. Well, he'd gotten killed in a car wreck that night. And so she felt really, really bad about it. And so years later, she reads an article about what Bodkin's doing with people, and she says, I'm going to try it out. I'm just going to go there and see. I've kind of already resolved it. It had been 20 years before. I just want to see what happens. So she goes out there and she connects with Bodkin, and she kind of makes jokes. She says, she figured some Sigmund Freud-looking doctor, with a pipe and a chair, but no, she said something like, no, he looks like a kid's baseball coach or something like that. She's like joking about his appearance, and she says, no, I'm not gonna, she wasn't really taking it too seriously. And believe it or not, those are the best case scenarios for Bodkin, because when he was working at the Veterans Center, he was getting like a 90% success rate with his therapy. But because they had no expectation, they all thought, oh no, this guy's, nothing's going to happen. Once he went into independent practice, people had expectations, it dropped to 70%. So expectations actually throw it off versus help it. And so she's in there, she's got no expectation. She's got, the baseball teacher's going to, I've read these articles. So she ends up going to this state, and he appears, and he says, no, it's not your fault. I'm in a place of light and love. Everything's good. And she's seeing him there, and he's got, he's positive, and she sees this dog jumping around. And she's like, whoa. So she's telling the doctor, whoa, there's a dog. He's like, a dog? What do you mean there's a dog? She says, yeah, there's a dog jumping around. And so she thought that was awfully strange, and so did Bodkin. And so she ends up coming out of the state, and she says, well, I don't know if it was real or not. It was interesting. I don't know who I really connected with him, but it was fine. And so she calls her girlfriend, which was that guy's brother, and says, yeah, I went to Bodkin and did the stuff, and it seemed like I connected with what seemed like your brother, but there was this dog jumping around. And she said, well, what did the dog look like? And she's like, well, it was like I can't remember, tan colored or something. It looked like this. And she goes, wow, that was a dog that we had, or that she had, that had just died a few months before. So I thought that was interesting, because I'm always looking to put dots together, creating kind of, to me, I need stuff to seem, like hey, this is real, because some of this stuff is pretty far out there that I'm talking to you guys about. So I'm constantly trying to bring this thread together of all this stuff. Oh, there's a couple of the people that Dr. Michael Newton, Joel Winton, Joe Fisher, Linda Bachman is a lady who is now doing the same type of therapy. She was trained by Michael Newton, and then Dr. Alan Bodkin, who I was talking about a minute ago. So what's interesting is that the thread between all this information, there is a thread, and the thread connects all these different experiences, because the near-death experiencers are seeing stuff very similar to what these other transdimensional people. They're seeing deceased people. They're connecting with these beings of light and love. There's just a lot of different threads that I hadn't gone into. I go into the book and I kind of make a little clearer point. But it appears that there is a thread between all these spiritual experiences, and I believe that there's a dimensional aspect to this, that we are existing in this dimension, and that's another dimension. We might not be perceiving it, but we exist within it. And what else is interesting is that people say, oh, I went to heaven and it was another place or whatever. I actually think it's all coexisting right here, right now. And everything we say and see and do is actually also perceived on the other side. And the more that we can, we're beginning to measure what has currently been perceived as unmeasurable. And that's why I think heart math and all this other research is very important to start to substantiate. And I really think that creating a lexicon that's separate from religion is very, very important, because we need to be able to use these words in a non-dogmatic way, because people have a near-death experience or have these transformative spiritual occurrences, and the only way they can describe them is with terms that they're familiar with through religion. So a lot of times they start to come back and they start to talk about it. It's like, wow, it seems as if you've had some kind of a religious experience, but yet I truly think, from my research, it doesn't matter if we're atheist, agnostic, if we are religious, if we believe in this religion, that religion, the other religion. We are all connected to this higher dimensional part of who we really are. And out there doesn't matter what we personally believe. We're all connected. And that's just my, it's like we're all part of this, all part of what I call the higher dimensional matrix of consciousness. And we're all connected to it. And that we are all cells within that same source. And I think that, that the more that we start to recognize this, we can start to, evolve as a soul. We can start to move into this next millennia to recognizing that we're all connected. And, I'm not trying to sound like some, metaphysical evangelist, but but I feel like I am right now. I feel like I am. Because I get so passionate about this. I mean, the world's in an interesting place right now, and I think it's time for us to start recognizing some of these ideas. It seems as if, we are God's paintbrushes, and we're the creative reflection of itself. And we need to start to recognize that. And the soul, and what else is interesting is, from looking at all this stuff, is the soul needs our DNA. We need to procreate so it has a place to come back to. So it's a very symbiotic, codependent relationship. So we need to be doing, positive, productive, expansive things. That's where, a lot of ideals that religions have about loving your neighbor and all that stuff is very important, because we need to treat each other with that love and compassion to keep the procreation, to make sure our souls have a place to exist, because God, or the infinite source, or whatever you want to call it, is all part of this. And the evolution of consciousness is happening right now. We need to make this transformational change. And so, we need to start to peel away the centuries of superstition about this phenomena. And we need to start to look at it as real science and move through this as scientists. And it's it's very important to create this. I see it as important, at least my perception, to create this spiritual framework, this lexicon of words, and this research, and put it all together into one page. And we all come from a place of light and love, and consciousness is eternal, and we exist within infinity, and we are the infinite. And this is from my research. I'm not just philosophizing. From my research has pointed to these ideals, so it's just very, very important for us to understand that the ultimate divine, the divinity of where we come from, seems to be love energy. That seems to be the source of everything. And that energy exists within all things. And I believe that understanding this inner truth, thinking beyond our mind, can clearly identify and help us connect with that eternal source. And so I'm going to close with spreading love is the most important action for human evolution. Thanks.
Whoa.
And I'll close up with this comment from a guy named Pierre Cardin, and he is not the jacket maker. I don't know if anybody remembers, there used to be and I think the first person I heard this Pierre Cardin statement was, I think Edward Salisbury told me this many, many years ago.
Will you have books to sell?
Yeah, and I have books. I've also written another book on light in medicine, which it's pretty amazing that you can take light and isolate it and create a monochromatic light. Accelerates healing. NASA's been using it for decades, so I wrote a book about different types of technologies that use light. You can take your blood and run it through ultraviolet light and basically remove pathogens and all kinds of interesting stuff about light. I interview guys from Harvard, Stanford, NASA, the FDA, UC Berkeley, Stanford, and I've actually invented a few light devices that I market. And if you guys have any questions, I'm just going to hide right here. No, I'm just kidding. No, any questions? Really? I left you guys stunned? Come on. Yeah, go ahead.
I've been hearing more and more about how your thoughts, your negative thoughts create illnesses, heart disease, high stress, and that they've done some therapeutic healings and even miraculous healings with the person meditating and thinking in terms of the body being healed, connecting to a higher source. So what you're saying, it's starting science and religion, not the dogmatic, but the spiritual seem to be connecting them more and more.
Yeah, and if you look at the cases of Anita Majori and Mellon Benedict and some of these other people, yes, without a doubt. And that's why I think these therapies are so important, because if you can get people up into these higher dimensional, to see themselves from a higher dimensional aspect, all of a sudden they recognize that those thoughts are affecting them, and that we can heal through our beliefs. There is no doubt in my mind.
I have a question. You talked about your research.
Mhm.
Is this, I don't know you or haven't read your books, but is this where is this research done?
The research is just me reading books and interviewing people. So I interviewed several people that had personal experiences. I've interviewed therapists. I've interviewed near-death experiencers. And so when I say research, I'm talking about my own personal research. So yeah, and Michael Newton, I personally interviewed, and some of these other people. And we had a small symposium where we had some people talk about some of these transdimensional therapies. Well, that's my term for the hypnotic therapy, when they get people in between lifetimes. Because once people can get in between those 2 points, like we're above, from a higher dimensional aspect, it's just amazing what it can do, because we start to recognize these thought patterns that can affect us, not just in illness, but just in everyday life. I mean, having, good luck or bad luck, I really believe is based on our belief system, having good things or bad things happen. Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there are people in this room that have heard or experienced the situation of when they were in a sexual union, there was a child conceived and
Mm-hmm.
they knew it instantly.
Mm-hmm.
But in the last couple or 3 months, they've actually produced a photograph of what happens at the instant of conception.
Mm.
And there's a light that's given off.
Whoa.
That's almost like a nuclear reaction. It's so powerful on its level.
Mm-hmm.
But if you saw it on our level, it would just be unbelievable. And to me, that's real consistent with the whole spiritual concept. But I don't exactly know I don't know how to say what it means, except I know it means something really important.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting, because I've got these theories, and I'm not really going into this in this. I don't know if the camera's still rolling, but I have these theories that that kind of tie into what you're saying. Is that, people say they see a light at the end of a tunnel. Mm-hmm. So I started thinking, well, it seems like what shape will we be? It's spherical, right? And then I think that sphere is part of the dynamic of our biomagnetic field. And every time our heart beats, I believe we're grounding in the shape of a vortex, right? Yeah. Boom, boom. So then I took this image of this like ice cream cone looking thing, and I put them next to each other, and I had these two vortexes swirl around each other, which created the double helix. And then I did an image of that, which created the heart, which I thought was awfully interesting. And I actually believe when every time our heart beats, we're grounding energy. But when we orgasm, we ground much more energy. And that this whole theory is that when the simultaneous spark occurs between these two, that a third spark, it's like it goes into another dimension, creating a third and stronger spark. So my theory is that we are not only procreating these physical bodies to exist within, we are procreating the universe we exist within, and all the stars we see we're actually creating. I wasn't going to go into that in this, but they used my art on the cover of a magazine because I drew that, and it was kind of, so I'm very interested in that. You had a question back there?
I was wondering if you have any good story about twins.
There's interesting, the Elizabeth Hallett and the other lady I mentioned have written a bunch of interesting books about how, and the Carmens, about how souls decide to come in together. It's like they're friends out there. They make some kind of an agreement to like say, hey, we're going to come in together. So I think that's pretty interesting. And I don't know if they're necessarily soul, because there's soul groups out there, and I didn't want to go into that. But Michael Newton talks a lot about soul groups and how there's agreements. And what's funny is we don't usually get to meet our soulmate in any given lifetime that's from this soul group, because the soul group brings information back up to the source. So if two people have the same life experiences, they're bringing less to the back. You see what I'm saying? So we actually when we go back. But yeah, there's cases where it seems souls do, from the soul groups in different situations, will get together and will come into life as a team. And it does seem as if brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers seem to come through the same, it's the same genetic line. It's almost like, your favorite pair of pants that's real comfortable, or a pair of shoes. And this is just my theory. It's almost like our genetic resonance is familiar to our soul. So we tend to reincarnate into those same family lines, because it's like putting on that comfortable pair of shoes. You recognize it. And there's karmic plays that you've done before with those people that you're trying to work through. So I know it was kind of an indirect answer to your question, but...
I think it's also because you like hanging out with those people. I don't think that it's necessarily, and that's my experience, that you like hanging out with certain people on this side. On the other side, it's no different. There's certain people you like hanging out with, certain people you don't like hanging out with, or you like hanging out with them less. And when you want to come back in, you kind of check out and say, hey, you want to go down the chute? Let's go do some stuff.
Exactly. No, he's right. They do. And they'll be born into the same families, and they're like, hey, let's do it.
My daughter was knocking on the door. Our kids are 6 years apart, and the reason it's so far apart is because when those of you who have children, when they're like 3, 4 years old, they're out of diapers, they're like potty trained, and they're like, great, I have my life back again. It's like, wow. And you trust the baby. You're less risk averse with the babysitter. In other words, you're like, oh, that person can babysit, that's fine. Whereas before that, it's like, no, they can't babysit. They got to get this kind of babysitter. So the girl kept knocking on my ex-wife's door in her dreams.
Yeah.
Every night. It went on for a year and a half. And I kept telling her, you go to sleep and tell her thank you, but no thank you, we're done. We're not, we don't want it. Go someplace else. And she kept, like every couple months, every 6 weeks, I was like, over and over. And for like a year and a half, I said, okay, let's talk about this. Okay, one more, that's it. And tell her she's got to be easy.
Yeah, and you can make these agreements. That's interesting. You made your agreements at a very conscious level, and that's what Walter McKitchen was teaching people to do: is make these agreements, get them out in the open, say hey, and just communicate.
So like you're saying, like less this coexistence more of this side and the other side, and I think that you're right. And
yeah,
she's just communicating. So she's 21 now. She's unbelievable.
That's great.
Thank you.
More questions? How much time do I have?
All the time you need.
All the time I need. Wow, I like that. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Curious if there's any research that you come across with collective consciousness, collective intelligence. It's something that I have a sense of that we as a planet are becoming. I mean, as we're getting more and more connected, enables connect to people around the world. Finding people who are more associated with us and like refining alliances that we didn't know were there and things like that. And so I'm curious if there are aspects of that.
Well, that's what I'm rooting for, is for us to connect at that level. I haven't come across a lot, but there is cases where collectively, Hagelin, I can't remember his first name, did a thing where he brought 4,000 people together to pray. So if you call it, and then and they were praying for a city that had a really high crime rate, and the crime rate decreased significantly during that period where those people were praying. So that's another form, what I would call, of collective consciousness, because prayer is projected intention, and it is powerful. And I really think there's a lot to it. And I think that if we all had this collective consciousness and really moved towards that, we could really make changes on this planet just with prayer and intention. But yes, Cheryl.
A little bit on that line, I believe that Barry Oser, who is, he's created So Sound Solutions,
Mm-hmm.
and he had the So Dome here in Austin for a while, probably 20 years ago, a little bit more than 20 years ago. And it's been more than 20. But he's still doing his research. And part of that had to do with him bringing, say, 8 people together and putting them into a state, and then asking them afterwards, because it's done with sound in total darkness, and it's a beautiful experience, but all of the people actually create the same, what can I say, the same consciousness, really.
Mm-hmm.
And so he would ask us, he was a full professor at
Mm-hmm.
UT in math and music. Anyway, after he would create a situation where people would come together in the dome, he would ask them to write their experience while they were under the influence of sound, and everybody had the same experience.
That's great. Well, there's what else is interesting that heart math has discovered is it talking about connected consciousness, is that when a bunch of people are in a room, that our hearts all start to beat at the same rate, which is pretty interesting. You know, kind of like women that live together, I've heard, you know, their cycles will start to be at the same. So if we start to look at these things and start to recognize, okay, here's some patterns here, let's elaborate, like what this doctor or scientist is doing, let's get all in the same, I mean, just think, if that works, let's say we had 1 million people listen to the same sound and have the same projected intention to make this planet better, then we could make those changes. There's a couple of stories that I kind of left out now that I have more time that have to do with near-death experience, which are very interesting, which a lot of people aren't familiar with. There's shared near-death experience and group near-death experience, which are two, I kind of classify these as two separate things. A group near-death experience is cases where people die at the same time and come back. There was a case where these 3 kids, I think it was, they were in India, and they were out playing in a wheat field or a crop field of some sort, and a storm came and the lightning came, and they had to get out of there as fast as they could. And as they're running to get out of there, they all jump up on this metal fence. And bam, hit by lightning. They all basically have a near-death experience. And during this near-death experience, they all leave their body, but they find that they're in this like a castle room. And all 3 of them are there, and this being of light is communicating to each one of them. But what's interesting is the being of light is perceived differently to each one. And I've got to remember exactly, one of them was seeing as his grandfather in his military outfit talking to him, saying, no, you're not coming home right now, you're going back. And the next one saw a religious figure. I think the other 2 saw religious figures, but the message was the same. You're not, this isn't your time, you're all going back. And they all came back. And what else was interesting is they were all perceiving each other, and they could perceive what each one was thinking, kind of like, you know, we were talking about how when somebody has a near death, they have the memories and feelings of all the people they've ever interacted with. Well, they also were connected, and they all were conscious of each other, knew what each others were feeling and thinking, and having this experience where this being, but it's so interesting that they all saw that being different, because that being was perceived to each one of them differently, because that being is a source of all, so it can connect, I guess. And then they all came back down, and they all told what they had experienced, and it was just very, very interesting. So there's other cases of this group near-death experience. There was another case, I don't know what war it was, but it was a war. These guys were all in the same foxhole, and they got hit by something, and they were all like this guy. They were all out of their bodies, and all these guys were going towards the light, except the one guy's going, no, I'm going back. And they're like, no, you don't want to go back. Your body is, look at your body. You're missing a leg and an arm, and come with us. And they're encouraging him, and he's having this whole experience, and they're saying, come with us. And they're going down the light tunnel. And he says, no, I'm going back. I got stuff to do. And so the one guy goes back, and he didn't know if that was a hallucination or what had happened, but he was damaged. He'd lost a leg or an arm or something, to find that the guys that were in the foxhole with him were all dead. But so they were all encouraging him. So that's a group near-death experience. And a shared near-death experience is what people have in hospice, or they're with a loved one that dies, and they, in some cases, will feel as if they're being pulled down that light tunnel with them, with the people that are going, and they're being drawn down that tunnel. And I even know somebody that said when their pet died, they felt that they were pulled down that path with their pet. So it's awfully interesting, because people wonder, will do pets go to heaven? And it sure seems like it from my research. It sure seems like there's a pet heaven out there. So these shared near-death experiences are pretty common to people that do hospice work. I mean, there's some very interesting experiences coming out of hospice, and at some point we would like to get somebody to speak that's written a book about hospice at one of our NDE group meetings. There's a guy down in San Antonio that we know, that we want to have come up and talk about all this, because there's a lot of interesting stories. Any more questions? Yep.
Matt, you had talked about heart math people.
Mm-hmm.
I thought you might want to invite, if you're interested, there is a movement from that group called Global Coherence Initiative. Global Coherence
I think I've heard you
Initiative
mention that. Global Coherence
is
Initiative.
a website, and it notifies people, and you can sign up, and at certain times you can kind of virtually tune in to a globe earth-wide attunement to the same focus and experience that resonance, if you would, because you're sharing that information, that connection, that conscious attunement. The best example I was able to use to help people recognize how group attention to an individual event resonates, well, when the towers fell, 9/11, the tangible fear and concern flashed across this country in less than an hour and a half, and how many people stopped what they were doing and focused on that. This Global Coherence Initiative says, let's focus on the positive. Let's share our personal intentions and measure the response of it. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad to see. We got to get some kind of global, good news network, the GNN, out there, and try and start to publish some of this information. Yes, sir.
We have a friend that was a walk-in from Sirius.
Okay.
And one of the things she brought with her was an ability to read codes. And so she did body work on people, but she could read what their code was. Have you ever heard anybody discuss anything like that?
No, I know a lot of people have real good talents as healers and stuff.
I think we've at a point now where we could almost discuss anything and not be run out of town.
Keep Austin weird, right?
Matt, are
Yes.
you familiar with the 2 books by Robert Schwartz called Your Life Plan Before Birth, and the second book, Your Soul Healing?
I'm familiar with his name. I have not read his material.
These 2 books literally changed my life in the following way. The first book was about the life plan you made before birth, and the particular methodology is fairly research-based, very credible. And the story is that yes, almost all souls make a life plan before birth, and as you said, oftentimes they get together with a group of souls that plan a drama, I'll be the drug addict, you be the cop, and she could be my mother, and like that, and they agree. But when they got on the other side, they all get together and say, how did we do? What did we learn? And there's no judgment about what happened. And that by itself really changed my life, because I was feeling so guilty that I hadn't done all the things I thought I was supposed to be here on earth accomplishing, but it wasn't being successful. The second book, Your Soul's Healing, then 10 years later goes through what he's learned in the 10 years since, and goes through a number of other topics that he didn't feel confident to deal with in the first book, like suicide, sexual abuse, like that. But in the second book, he makes it clear that the major thing that almost all souls choose before birth is a major crisis, a challenge that'll be very difficult to deal with. And the bigger the challenge, the more you can be sure that it was a soul's life plan before birth decision to pull in that kind of challenge. When you discover it, to not be reactive, but to kind of relax, feel the emotions that it brings up, and as soon as you can experience those emotions fully and kind of like get meta to it, like you said about meta therapy, then ask what is the opposite emotion. That's what the soul is going to learn from having chosen that challenge.
That's right, and I totally agree with that. And it seems as if we choose certain situations to grow from, and if we look at that from a positive and optimistic standpoint, then we grow from it. If we react to it and start to try and blame other things, we don't grow from it, because we're saying, oh no, it's because of that, because of that. Once we say, hey, I created this for me, that's what so many people have trouble with when I say, no, you picked your parents. They were like, whoa, no, that didn't happen that way. And it's like, well, yeah, it did, and you chose it to grow from, to take these challenges on, to be a better person in some way, to grow spiritually. And a lot of people have trouble with that idea of that we picked all these situations we put ourselves into. But the funny thing is, we're constantly picking situations that we put ourselves into by our actions and by our words. And I think the faster that humanity recognizes this, that we can create a global shift. But these ideas, through these organizations that a few of you have mentioned, we all need to start to recognize that that we have this potential to grow from every situation that's put in front of us, because there are some very interesting situations being put before us globally right now.
The major insights of this work are contained in his introductory in chapter 1 of Your Soul's Healing, your Healing Gift, and it's free online at Amazon.
Nice.
Thank you.
So how do the people with the testimonies quantify growth? How do you measure growth? Like what's...
I guess we measure it when we get back home, or back to the other side. I mean, because you gauge it there. I mean, and I would say I would gauge it at a personal level. I mean, because I'm growing just like anybody else here. Is that how somebody decides to deal with the situation, creatively or destructively? You know what I mean? If they come up with a resolve that's the best and most positive versus come up with a resolve that's self-destructive or hurts other people. I mean, to me, I would define it in those two ways. Yes?
Well, I just wanted to say thank you for coming and spreading the message and sharing your wisdom.
Well, thanks for coming. I always love to tell stories. I love research. I love information, and it needs to get out. People need to spread this information. Yep. I got it. All right. Thanks. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks.